guess Melissa is also raising her hand as somebody who's interested.
Melissa's raising her hand?
I think Melissa just raised her hand as
Okay.
being interested from the Haystack Rock Awareness Program.
Okay. David?
So, in looking at the procedures document, OPAC on page 1 did delegate to the executive committee the ability to make interim appointments to staff, and then that would be subject to ratification at a future council meeting. So, but as far as other committees and working groups, it's still left to the council. So I guess, as Steve has said, that might be something OPAC can do, because we've done it before with respect to staff members as far as an interim appointment subject to ratification. So there's an option there. It just depends if OPAC wants to go down that road and delegate it to the executive committee on an interim basis, or whether you want to wait until the OPAC wants to wait until the next meeting. So there's a couple steps that could be considered in this process.
And one question I have too, is there a kind of a cap on the number of people we want in the working group? You know, studies say more than 8, you start to become ineffective.
OPAC, quorum.
Okay, what is it?
More than a majority of OPAC members starts getting into more than a working group. It starts becoming perhaps a quorum of OPAC, and then you get into public notice meetings. And Steve, maybe you can weigh in on that, because I don't want to start advising OPAC on
But
that.
I was also asking too, does the work, I mean, the
You
working
think
group.
you think that would be an issue with that?
Are you treating them as a public meeting anyway?
Yes,
So-
all of these
so-
working groups.
Fundamentally, it wouldn't change how they act, I mean, but you are, it'd be an advisory committee to an advisory committee. Clearly, that is a public meeting.
Okay, that's.
I would probably lean towards avoiding quorum, but,
Right.
that,
That was my
if
point.
that's where you wanted to head, we could look at that issue.
Right.
Yeah. I was just asking in terms of, as everyone expresses interest, do we want to have some sort of factor? Because you could end up with a working group of 30 or more people, and,
Yeah, I would keep it in the low teens.
so there's no guidance on that, it's just what we.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Okay,
it's.
great. There's currently 7 people on there. Okay. So now we have 2 proposals. We have one to appoint Scott, who's been participating, and then, or we have the option of just delegating to the executive committee appointments in the interim and revisiting it at our spring meeting. And we can do some sort of mashup, but I assume I need some sort of official proposal from the floor, so we can just move forward. Charlie?
I'd like to propose that we figure this out right now, given the public scoping and stuff is going to be happening in the interim, and I think we have it kind of laid out in front of us. So I can start by saying that I would, as chair, I would really appreciate some continuity with Scott McMullen's participation. So I would appreciate his ongoing participation. And I'm making a motion. I'm making a motion for Scott McMullen to remain on the working group. And then I'd also, I'll do one motion at a time.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, so with that, we have a proposal for Scott McMullen to participate officially in the working group, and a second. Is there any questions or comments related to that? Hearing none, would you like to do a formal vote or consensus? Consensus, all right. All those in favor? All right, great. Scott is, we have clear guidance. Scott is officially on the work group. Now,
I'll make a motion for Melissa Kaiser and Joe Liebezeit, and maybe the opportunity for them to give their background or interest within the Rocky Shore to help OPAC members better understand what contributions they may bring.
okay. So with that, not to put you all on the spot, but would you like to stand up and give, John first?
Well, first of all, I apologize for not being up to speed on the makeup of the Rocky Shores group, but I would like to be updated on the sector representation that is there now.
Great question.
So currently, we have had a fishing representative, Scott McMullen. We have had a conservation organization representative, Gina Carter. We've had Charlie Clybone as the non-consumptive recreation member. And then we've had state agencies. So there's basically three groups who have been represented to date.
Excuse me,
And
point of order. Doesn't Scott also represent cable industries, who's also a user of that area? Is it official or not official?
his official seat on OPAC was a North Coast commercial fisheries representative. As a member of the public, he can certainly represent his history as a fisherman as well as bring his experience as an undersea cable committee director. So he can bring both to the table now as a member of the public. So
Great.
that leaves a gap in the commercial fishing representatives on that working group potentially.
Okay, great. John, do you have anything else?
No, thank you.
Walter?
The only thing I'd like to say about other people joining right now is a fairness issue here. It's great to have these other people who want to be part of it, but we weren't opening this up and it wasn't announced for other people to be put on. So I think at this time we should just have Scott and whoever else is interested submit their request to Andy, and if we do it with the executive board, that's how we do it.
If the council would like, we can put out a call for individuals to nominate themselves, and that should be reviewed at a later point in time by either the council or the executive committee.
Great. David?
So I would follow up with what Walter said, even though I won't be at the next OPAC meeting, I think for purposes of transparency, and I think we talked about this with the coordinating council later on in discussion, I think it would probably be appropriate just to appoint Scott, since we've known Scott over the years, and in all fairness, not only the people in the audience, but everyone else who might be interested, is delegate to the executive committee, and perhaps have Charlie included in that discussion. Any call out for the public nominations or people who are interested, you can vet them, or at least discuss it as an executive committee and bring back your thoughts or recommendations back to the OPAC meeting in the spring. And I know Charlie talked about continuity and having people on it right now, but the folks that are interested, they can still be there as a member of the public and participate that way, so they won't be necessarily out of the loop. They just won't be formally a member of the group.
So I'm hearing that the last two speakers are proposing the idea that we should provide a process in which folks can nominate, and that there will be some balanced representation across different sectors that join the group. And so yeah, that's one of the ideas on the table. Charlie?
I accept that. I would hope that process would be expedient enough that it wouldn't hamper the product of getting through, particularly given much of this public scoping process is going to be happening well in advance of, which is arguably the most important part of this, is going to be happening before the next OPAC meeting. So I would ask the executive committee to be quick in that process.
In my motion,
And fair.
my recommendation was to include you in that executive committee
Sure.
process.
Shelby?
So, yeah, just to be clear, with the delegation to the executive committee for the establishment of this process, we are then not empowering the executive committee to do interim appointments.
I think we are.
I think they are. I think the idea that there would be a process, this might understand, correct me if I'm wrong, there would be a process in which we would ask people to self-nominate themselves to participate in the working group. There'd be some sort of discussion about balance of sectors and different perspectives as you evaluate the candidates, and that the executive committee would make a decision expediently so that they can participate in the process that's occurring this winter. That's what I understand
Yes.
is being discussed. Yes, David?
Shelby, it will be similar to what we do with staff members as laid out in the procedures document. Right now, the executive committee has the authority to appoint interim staff members pending council ratification. So to your point, the executive committee would make interim appointments to the working group based on their process, and then bring it back to the spring meeting for OPAC to ratify it. And that way, we at least have a process in place with OPAC's involvement at the end through ratification.
So the executive committee is doing the process and the appointment in the next.
If OPAC delegates it to them to do so, then the executive committee would do the process, make the interim appointments, and bring those appointments back to OPAC for ratification at the meeting in the spring.
So David, would you like to turn that into a formal?
That was my motion,
Well, okay.
so I don't have to repeat it.
All right, I'll try and summarize. David's motion, is there a second? Or I should repeat it. David's motion on the floor.
I can repeat if you like.
Please, thank you.
Okay, the motion is to delegate to the executive committee a process to accept nominations or applications from the public to participate on the working group and be a member of the working group, and to make interim appointments of who they select as appropriate for the working group, and then to bring those interim appointments back to OPAC in the spring for ratification.
Is there a second? John, Holloway, second. Are there any questions or comments on that motion? Okay. We'll again do consensus unless there's someone who'd like to say something else. So, does everyone in OPAC agree with that proposal on the floor?
Thanks.
Active nodding. Okay, great. We now have a process.
And Charlie was included in the executive committee process.
With the amendment that Charlie's included. And hopefully we'll can stop sweating bullets all of a sudden because I'm gonna be put on the spot, so. Okay. With
Can I
that,
provide one question or point of clarification from Steve?
yes,
I believe that it has been OPAC's executive committee, they've had the ability to ask working chairs of their working groups to participate in the executive committee actions.
Yes.
In the past, as part of their authority. And so, Charlie could be asked to participate, or any other working group chair could be asked to participate on those calls and as a part of that committee if there is material relevance to their working group. That's correct,
Correct.
right, Steve?
That's correct.
So that's not explicitly needed as a part of this.
No,
But I thought I would make that point to the council for those new members. That does happen, depending upon the subject matter that the council is dealing with.
great, thank you for that clarification. All right, with that, we will adjourn this agenda item and move on. In the agenda now, we are moving into public comment. So, we now have two individuals that are interested in providing public comment. And the first one is Chrissy Smith from the Friends of Neatards Bay and the Friends of Cape Falcon.
Thanks for having me, and it's exciting to see you guys on the North Coast. We like it when things happen up here on the North Coast. Although I say that getting up here was a little bit of a challenge. I have a 3 and a 5-year-old they were having a hard time settling down from Halloween, so that made for a really fun morning, but I'm here. My family resides in Sonoma County, and we've been there for quite a long time, and we're really closely tied to the marine environment. And my husband, he works in the oyster industry. He's the production manager at the Whiskey Creek Shellfish Hatchery, which you all have likely heard about, as they play a large role in advancing our understanding of ocean acidification, and they still do, with a monitoring network in commercially important bays. And I also work for 2 organizations that work to engage people around the ocean and the marine environment. I work with the Friends of Neatards Bay, and we fund 8 school group programs and over 20 public programs, all designed to get people engaged in the marine environment and help promote stewardship of that area. And I also work with a fairly new organization called the Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. And that group is composed of volunteers from the local community as well as representatives from various different agencies. And our goal is to promote Oregon's 5 marine reserve sites and ocean conservation locally. And so we focus on the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve to do that. It's a really great group to be involved in. We encourage as much scientific research to happen inside the marine reserve as possible. And what's really great about doing that is we directly contribute to collecting that data, as we do with the Ocean Certification Project, or we recruit in volunteers that can help collect data, like with the Seabird Monitor Project. What's fun is to watch the learning happen in real time. And what our group is able to do is bring that learning back into the community. And so we just coordinated our next set of speakers to come into the area and share what we're learning about marine reserves. And that's really powerful, and it's a really powerful way to engage people around the ocean, is to have them focus in on an area like Cape Falcon. The ocean's big and vast, and when you're trying to teach people about the ocean, that can be really valuable to give them a boundary to think about, and that's what marine reserves can do. Looking forward, these groups are continuing their work to get people out and about to learn about these areas. Cape Falcon is organizing some boat tours next year, so you guys can be looking out for that if you're on the North Coast. We're working with a local charter company to take a tour of the marine reserve, and once outside, we'll stop and crab and fish to kind of highlight both the fishing industry as well as the marine reserves that are in Oregon. We are also embarking on our 3rd year of the Explore Nature program, which is right here. And this is a collaboration of different organizations that are highlighting Tillamook County's natural resources. They're mostly conservation oriented, and it highlights both the resources, the work we've done to protect them, as well as the industries that are dependent upon them. And we just got recognized with the Award of Excellence from the Tillamook Economic Development Council and Visit Tillamook Coast. So it's really cool to see this partnership, which the Friends of Netar's Bay and the Friends of Cape Falcon have both been a huge part of making this program happen. It's really cool to see it being recognized by businesses as well as the tourism industry in Tillamook County, and that they're embracing conservation as a way to communicate with the public. So I thank you guys for being here. Just kind of wanted to highlight a little bit about what's happening on the North Coast, at least from my organization's standpoint, and the role that Marine Reserves has played in helping us communicate about the oceans and help people learn about the oceans in Oregon. So, thanks.
Thank you, Chrissy. Before you go, does anyone have any questions
Just a quick
or
one.
thoughts? Yeah.
How large is your membership at this point with, well, you said 2 groups. Which group in particular were you speaking on behalf of?
I was just highlighting a little bit of both, and
Okay,
just
so what's
working with
the-
Tillamook.
How large are the groups now as far as involvement, whether it's formal members or just people that are helping you in your efforts?
Sure, so the Friends of Netar's Bay, we have a strong working board of about 10 volunteers, and we have 1 part-time staff person, which is me. And we have about 20 or 30 volunteers that help us coordinate some different programs and help us, our school groups. The Friends of Cape Falcon has about 10 core members, but we have a lot of other representatives that kind of bounce in and out as well. And we're composed of, like I said, the community, but also local, state, and national representatives from various different organizations, both environmental education as well as conservation. And then also we work really closely with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and Oregon State Parks.
Are you also part-time staff for the Friends of Cape Falcon?
I
Just
am.
for the, okay, so you kind of,
I bounce between both jobs.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So it's hard to make it work on the north or the coast when it's very royal.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right.
Next up in public comment, we have Nadia.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Nadia Gardner, and I live in Arch Cape, which is an unincorporated community in Clatsop County between Cannon Beach and Manzanita. It's right on the edge of Oswald West State Park and the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. I have a long history with Oregon's oceans. I come from a multi-generational Oregon family. I'm a native. Grew up in Portland, but I moved up here when I was 25, so almost 20 years ago now. But even before that, I spent every summer in a cheap rental in Cannon Beach with my family, and would go as many days as we could down to Short Sands Beach, otherwise known as Smuggler's Cove, and swim in that ocean without a wetsuit, and float around on those big logs in those creeks. And so really, Oregon's ocean is part of me. And so about 20 years ago, I came to my first Marine Reserves meeting. It was one of these right here. It was the first governor's proposal, and then it became the second governor, and then the first governor came back. Because I thought, what a great idea this is, to make sure that not only our important lands like Oswald West State Park, but also our important places off the ocean, and ideally adjacent to our important lands on the land, foreign areas on the land, be protected and be places to preserve not only biodiversity, but also provide that really important baseline scientific location. So fast forward some decades, and all of a sudden I'm on the Cape Falcon community team. I'm a survivor. That was a really tough process, and in the end we ended up with our 5 marine reserves, but Cape Falcon was the last to go into effect, partially because of the challenges that we had designating that site. But I'm really proud of being a part of that effort and finding a place that we can conserve our ocean that has the least negative impact on our fishing industry. But then coming out of that, we had to wait a few years, and then 2 years ago, it was going into effect, and we realized that Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife had really limited capacity. Their funding is rocky, and their Marine Reserves team doesn't really have enough money to do what they need to be doing around marine reserves and really getting the word out. And so myself and a group of people in Clatsop and Tillamook counties said, well, how do we move this forward positively? How do we support these marine reserves as they go into effect? How do we support the agencies? But more importantly, how do we engage our local communities, these people that live on the shore, that walk down to those beaches every day, that surf, that fish, that enjoy, and really the reason we live here. Why not get them involved in this really important process? So get it away from this state-heavy bureaucratic thing, but bring it down to the people. And so we founded the Friends of Cape Falcon at that time, and brought in Christy about a year later. So that group is now more than 2 years old, almost 3 years old. And the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve has been into effect and is now as old as my son. He was born 2 days later. So I'm happy to report that in my communities and the work that we do, that it is widely supported. The Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. Many people still don't know it exists, but when we go to our farmers markets and we table and when we walk down to the beach and we say, hey, do you know? People are really excited about it. And they think it really makes sense. And so that's a really nice positive outcome to the process and to what we do now. And so I want to thank you all for being a part of that, bringing that to our communities. And in this time of really tragic reports about what's happening, like on the high ocean and the decimation of sharks, on the, all these things that we can't do much about, the bluefin tuna and the pirates, it's nice to have a little bit of opportunity for us in the local communities to do something good. So that's kind of my blurb on that, but I did have a couple asks for you. One is, when you have an opportunity, it would be great if ODF&W had more financial support so that they can do the work they need to do around marine reserves. The Cape Falcon Marine Reserve has been in effect for 2 years, does not have a management plan. And we would love to have a management plan this year and this next year. I don't know if they're gonna get to it or not. They're so busy, they have so much great work to do. They have very limited capacity, so if you could support them using both public and private money. I know that during the process, the private money question came up a lot, and there was a lot of opposition, especially in some of the opposition community, of them getting private money to support some of this work. But I'm hoping now that we're in a less contentious period that we can think broadly about, how do we leverage state and federal monies? How do we, make more bang for our buck by bringing in these organizations who are willing and have the money to support the great work that they're doing. And so if you could support that in any way, I'd really appreciate it. And also, I look at the list of the OPAC representation, and I just see one person on there actually from the North Coast, from Clatsop County in particular. I don't even know if there's anybody from Tillamook County, definitely not from North Tillamook County. And so I'd love to see more representation of us up north. We've got 2 marine reserves, Cascade Head and Cape Falcon in Tillamook and Clatsop counties, and I'd like to see some more representation. I understand there might be some openings coming up, and so maybe you can think about that when you're making that selection. I'd appreciate it. So thanks so much for your time and for your service for Oregon's Ocean. On behalf of myself and the group that I volunteer for, I thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Any questions or comments? Terry?
So I represent the North Coast, and I fished out of the Columbia River, and I fish at Cascade Head, just below the Marine Reserve. I've spent extensive amount of time fishing shrimp out of Garibaldi over the years, so, plus being a politician from that area doesn't hurt either, and working with closely. But I do try to represent the full area from my years of experience in the ocean in that area, not just in one spot.
Thank you.
Wonderful, great. Megan?
Just gonna add on that note, I'm Grand Ron and Archive has interests in the whole northern coast that I represent on, regional planning bodies. Might not be so much like fisheries interests, things like that, or commercial interests, but there is, tribal representation in different ways for the north coast as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here, Megan. Megan's come down and taken a tour of the Marine Reserve with us, and really gave us some great insights into tribal interests in the area. Thank you.
All good connections. Charlie?
Nadia, you mentioned this funding needs, and I think we're all pretty aware that ODF&W is operating an austerity budget. I wanted to make you aware, if you weren't already, the Oregon Ocean Science Trust, and that might be an opportunity for you to engage. It is very tenuous about how Oregon would use and be able to use private dollars in things like agency, particularly controversial agency actions like marine reserves and programs. So I would encourage you to engage in that process, and I'd be happy to offline share more information about the Ocean Science Trust and how that's all sort of been set up to create some nice structure around that.
And I believe their next meeting is December
7th.
7th. Great. David?
So if you're able to stick around in the afternoon, we're getting an update on the Marine Reserves process from Kristen, and that management plan issue might be a topic of discussion since you brought it up. Maybe we can ask a question about that, just so you get some clarification. So I would recommend you sticking around for that agenda.
I will be here.
Okay.
And also, right before the meeting, Andy did send out the Cascade Head management plan that was recently processed and approved, so not the one you're talking about, but progress. Chris?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much. We're always glad to hear from the public. Also, some folks came in late, and so I didn't know, and we had already had the sign-up sheet up here, so is there anyone else that would like to provide public comment?
I said no.
All right, Melissa?
But if you don't mind, so I haven't participated, come to any of these meetings before, so I'm just say a little bit. But I'm Melissa Kaiser. I coordinate the East Rock Awareness Program.
Can you talk into the microphone?
Cannon Beach. And I was living in Astoria, and just as of last week moved down to Arch Cape, so it's nice to be back up in Astoria for a day. I miss it already. Anyway, so I coordinate the East Rock Awareness Program for the city of Cannon Beach. Our program, many people haven't heard of it, much like they haven't heard of some of the marine reserves, unfortunately. Our program is a 33-year-old learning-based environmental, interpretive educational program. We have made over 1.5 million contacts during those 33 years on the beach with visitors who come to Haystack Rock. That is the Haystack Rock in Cannon Beach. There's many of them. This program stemmed out of the obvious need to protect these rocky intertidal areas before there was a plan in place. In, I believe it was 68, the wildlife refuge was designated, the Oregon Islands Wildlife Refuge, and two teachers in the area saw the need to go out to protect the rock, and would go out every day with their truck and talk to students, would talk to adults, anybody visiting the rock about this intertidal area. After the Rocky Shore Plan was passed and the area was designated a marine garden in 91. Our program really grew from that. Now we have about 13 interpreters during the year. We have anywhere from 100 to 200 volunteers from all over the state, from Washington. We have this kid from Washington who comes every spring break. I think he's 10 now. And his parents bring him out for the whole week during his spring break just to volunteer at the Rock. So we're environmental educators and interpreters. We're not enforcement agents. But through that work, we have been able to contact or make contacts with so many individuals who would not have that educational element that we have at Haystack Rock. And being one of the closest points to Portland, we have this amazing opportunity to connect with all these individuals and educate them about this incredible, diverse Rocky Shore area. I'm also on the board of the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, and I am on the board for the Wildlife Center of the North Coast, which is based out of Astoria. It's a rehab center, mostly focusing on the rehab of seabirds. And I am also now the Oregon Board Chair for the Northwest Aquatic and Marine Educators. Annually, we have one conference. We try and have two, but we normally have one conference. And this year, 2018, the conference will be held in Portland with field trips coming out to the coast. So it's really focusing on these coastal environments. I just wanted to highlight my program and talk about how it really grew from some of the, not legislation, I guess, but recommendations that were passed in 91, and some of what is covered in the Territorial Sea Plan, and how it enabled our program to really show people why these areas are so important to be protected. We can really change the focus as educators when people come to the coast and they don't really understand what we're doing necessarily. We're this kind of open air aquarium, but they come and they see all these other people potentially trampling wildlife. And they see how the environment changes, the low tide to high tide, and they realize the importance of our work, and their minds can really be changed to understand why we should protect these areas. But we also talk about why we protect the areas in terms of fishermen. Living in Astoria, I come from my husband's side of the family, they are fishermen, and talking about that aspect, why we preserve the oceans, not just for conservational purposes, but to provide appropriate amount of fish so we can sustain our fishing industries economically is really important and an aspect that our program talks about as well. Our program also participates in 9 now different citizen science programs, partnering with Joe Levesite from the Audubon Society of Portland, partnering with Coastal Observation Seabird Survey Teams, partnering with so many different acronyms, I probably can't remember them all. But these very important citizen science programs, collecting the data so that scientists can do very important work, make very important observations and recommendations to councils like this. And again, I don't know if our program would have been as sustainable had we not had that protection and designation as a marine garden, in addition to having the wildlife refuge protection as well. So it's really highlighting the importance of that. Last, I just wanted to talk about connectivity and making sure larger policy groups like this, or advisory groups like this, are connected to these smaller organizations or fishing organizations. This is the first time again that I've participated or come as a public observer to one of these meetings, and Charlie kind of invited me to this meeting and to the meeting for the Territorial Sea Plan working group, and just making sure that we continue those connectivities so we all are on the same page. And so you have that input from these members who are participating in these groups, who are on the ground, who are on the sand, who are in the ocean, who really have that knowledge, that ecosystem-based knowledge. I know Andy's doing some really wonderful work with OCOIN, and God, that's a new acronym, and I can't remember it, but working to make sure all scientists and individuals like myself collecting data and different citizen science programs are working together to have a shared network of resources. What is the acronym, Andy?
Oregon Coastal and Ocean Information Network.
Thank you. And Travel Oregon as well is working on some things similar but different, and trying to connect coastal programs, or not Travel Oregon, I'm sorry, what are they called? Thank you. Oregon Coast Visitors Association is working to connect programs to make sure they're sharing dates, events, when we're doing our trainings, when we're doing microplastic filtration to make cool bracelets, how we're engaging with visitors and how we can connect with visitors. So just making sure connectivity is there at all times is very important. So thank you all for what you're doing. Yeah. Any questions?
Thank you, Melissa. Any questions? Again, thank you for coming. So in terms of moving forward, we have about 10 minutes left before lunch, which we will adjourn on time. I was gonna use this 10 minutes if we're interested in receiving the updates from folks and perhaps about the marine debris work. We could start there and put you on the spot.
That's what Charlie-
Sure, can I walk around
Sure,
here and
absolutely.
see people?
I warned you.
Yes, you did, David, thank you. I'll be brief. As you guys may or may not remember, for some of the new folks, back in December of 2015, the Ocean Policy Advisory Council identified priorities. One of those priorities being marine debris. We established a working group for marine debris. And our major strategy and goal with that group was to work with NOAA. And I will invite Chris Walden to chime in here in a moment, but to work with NOAA on developing a marine debris action plan for the state of Oregon. That marine debris action plan does a couple of different things. One, it recognizes the existing work and the existing priorities that we have for marine debris. But two, it also looked at essentially how we prioritize future work and how we're going to coordinate on future work. And this is across NGOs, agencies, community groups. We tried to cast a pretty broad net here. That plan was formally adopted by NOAA. The state of Oregon, OPAC did recognize that plan and sort of accepted it. It was presented to the state land board and the governor, thanks to Chris Costelli's leadership. But it wasn't ever really officially recognized by the state of Oregon. And that may be why during this latest round of NOAA funding, we didn't have a lot of applications going in for marine debris projects in Oregon. And this is why I wanted to provide this update. One of the other goals of doing this was to try and fund work in Oregon that was currently unfundable for the most part. NOAA has a marine debris program. They have extensive dollars in that program. They are able to allocate to groups working on marine debris, and what they've really asked of each of the states is to sort of prioritize your work, be collaborative, and work through this process with us to sort of develop a plan for your state. And then that'll give you a bit more prioritization for funding. So it is actually, I want to just call out to members of OPAC and to the governor's office in particular that when the request for proposals from NOAA went out, they officially recognized the Oregon Marine Debris Action Plan as something that is a fundable for projects. And beyond that, we had 2 or 3 requests come from NOAA basically saying, hey, you went through this process, but we haven't heard from anybody in Oregon submitting marine debris projects. Here's a couple of ideas. So it was kind of NOAA tapping the state of Oregon on the shoulder saying, hey, you went through this process, you said you needed money, somebody should apply for something. So I want to make OPAC aware that by the next call for proposals from NOAA, which will probably be August, maybe next
Is that
year?
the stuff NEAR sends out?
Yes.
Yeah, I get those sometimes.
There may be other action plans identified from other states. I think currently right now there's maybe one other action plan that was recognized, Great Lakes action plan was identified in the call for proposals. The next round it may be 3 or 4 states identified. Before it becomes every coastal state, I want to encourage all state agencies involved in marine debris and all NGOs to take a hard look at coordinating some projects before August catches up with us, and we're basically caught with our pants down trying to pull together proposals. It will be my goal to try and initiate some process between now and August, hopefully within OPAC, but maybe beyond and into some other NGOs and other groups that don't participate as regularly in OPAC, for example, SOLVE or the Oregon Coast Aquarium, to try and get some proposals representative of our state's priorities, because I think that we've put some work into that, and we have some opportunity fund, and we should take advantage of that. So I'll leave it there. Now, allow Chris to jump in first here.
Yeah, Chris, Shelby, then David.
One note I want to make is that there's two different funding opportunities through NOAA's marine debris program. One is for marine debris removal grants, and one is for marine debris prevention grants. The marine debris removal grants is the one the application period has already closed, and actually officially closed today. Unless I'm looking at it incorrectly, and I did just pull it up, the marine debris prevention grants is actually still open for applications until December 16th.
There was a call for an LOI,
And maybe that's it. Maybe
and the
that's it.
LOI has now passed.
Okay.
So my guess is that NOAA responds to those LOIs.
And I'm not actively engaged in this process, so that's just something possible. Otherwise, it's sort of a letter of interest, intent of interest, and they'll narrow it down and invite formal. So if that was the process here, then we might have missed it. I was just pulling up the official grant announcement, so.
And I want to make note that the organization that I work for, Surfrider Foundation, we did put an LOI in. It was a little hasty because we were equally as guilty of not being prepared. I want to recognize that Laurel Hillman went out of her way as well to tap us on the shoulder, and some others to say what kind of stuff can we put together. We reached out to the aquarium and SOLVE. But I'd like for us to, see this further out in the future. A lot of times when these call for proposals come together, they're big proposals, these federal proposals, and we need to be working on these ahead of time. So front-loading these projects was kind of what the action plan was supposed to do, and we probably ought to try and act on that.
But you're correct, the program typically seems to put the call out for these in mid to late August, so that's the appropriate target this year.
Great. Shelby?
So Charlie, I saw the number of people who contributed to the plan, and the diversity of groups, so, was there, like, have you or have others tried to have a conversation about sort of what is, what was the incubation factor? Was it more than one? Was it a timing thing? Was it a variety? Are there things that can be addressed?
I think we need some process and dialogue between now and August to identify that. I take some responsibility in that we didn't have marine debris action plan or marine debris working group meetings since the completion of that plan. I was also looking for some sort of indication from the state of Oregon that this was something that we were formally accepting as a state. And I know that the states really never fully recognized it, other than this body. So that doesn't give directive to agencies. That directive generally comes from the governor's office. I did do quite a bit of outreach to SOLVE and the Oregon Coast Aquarium to try and put together a collaborative proposal based on things that were identified in that plan. I was a little preoccupied with the legislative session because that was another place where I focused activity to put into motion some of the things identified in the action plan. So I think some leadership between now and August and some dialogue, pretty much like you said, what gives. My guess is people heard in August a call for letters of interest and people were busy. And we need to be planning ahead of time.
David, and then we are gonna adjourn.
My question is similar to Shelby's, but, in December 2015, OPAC took the initiative to get that marine debris action plan process going with NOAA, and you remember that. So we were involved to that extent. I think after the plan was approved, kind of OPAC kind of stepped aside, and I think we were all assuming the people that were kind of indicated in the plan to take on certain projects guess we assumed that was gonna happen, so perhaps there needs to be checking in on, do we need to have a more established process in place to get people focused before next August, so we don't miss that deadline?
Yeah, and I think a large number of the entities involved in that process were state agencies. And so I can't give state agencies
Right.
any directive.
Well, it's not direction, it's just perhaps letting the appropriate people know that we need a better process, so they may be able to do so.
Jason?
Yeah, I think that you acknowledged that OPAC approved the plan, and I think from the state's perspective, this is the correct body, this is the body in which that approval would happen. So I do think that from my perspective, I think the governor's office perspective, the plan's been shared and summarized for the governor. I did that personally, and that reflected that this body had accepted it.
Laurel, and then Chris, and then I swear we're breaking lunch.
I'll be really quick. I just wanted to point out that I did reach out to Mir, we have some short-term equipment needs, but it turns out those grants can't fund equipment needed, equipment for our beach rangers, build or remove medium and larger size debris more efficiently and safely from the beaches, but, so, we did reach out to them on that. But weren't able to apply for the grant for that type, actually getting stuff off the beach.
We made a good run with the legislature.
Chris?
I was just gonna say, Charlie's right, I know Washington's looking at starting their scoping process, so for sake of healthy competition, they're actually starting things right now, so.
California as well.
Yeah, West Coast, there you go.
Well, on that note, thank you for that brief update, Charlie, and lunch is hot and ready for PAC members and staff, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna adjourn for about 20 minutes, if you can get your lunch and take care of any personal things, and then we're gonna come back and watch the Ocean Frontiers new movie that's come out, and that'll take about 30 minutes, and then we'll have another quick break before we move on to our other agenda items. So break now until about 10 till. Thank you.